All right, welcome, greetings to our next edition of Flip Notes on early Japan. So early Japanese society was divided into what's called clans. Each clan had its own chief and a special god or goddess who was seen as the clan's original ancestor. So each of these clans fought with each other for control over the islands, the different islands of Japan. And it was finally a clan called the Yamato clan who came to dominate part of the largest Japanese island, Honshu. For the next 1,000 years, the Yamato was basically the clan that set up Japan's first and only dynasty. Now, they claimed direct descent from the sun goddess. Now, later Japanese emperors are going to be revered as living gods, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the feudal structure of Japan. But that was pretty much how the Japanese culture got its start. So the Japanese language is actually very closely related to that of Korea. It's closely related to, but it's completely different, the two languages, but they are closely related. From early on, Japan and Korea were in continuous contact with one another. And eventually, Koreans introduced Buddhism to Japan, and with it came a knowledge of Chinese writing, which really opened up a sudden spark interest in China over in Japan, interest in the Chinese civilization. So if we look at this map, China obviously is very close to Japan. Now, in the 600s is when Japan began to look towards China for guidance. In fact, Japanese nobles would be sent directly to China to learn as much as they could and then bring back what they could. That exchange is going to last for about 200 years. So during that time period, from 600s to the 800s, students, monks, traders, even government officials went from Japan to China, learned from China, and then went back to Japan. Now, we do need to understand the concept of selective borrowing. That's key term. You need to know it. Now, Japan was very good at this. Japan selected the best parts of Chinese culture while preserving their own unique identity. So the idea of selective borrowing is unique to Japan. They're very good at it, and they continue to do it today. So what happened in China? Things that they borrowed from China, one of them is they adopted the title of Heavenly Emperor, and they claimed absolute power for that emperor. So the Chinese basically set the model for the Japanese emperor. So in Japan, they too adopted that title, Heavenly Emperor, for their own emperor. The Japanese also borrowed the idea of a capital city. So they made a capital city called Nara, which was modeled on the Tang capital, Chang'an. So you can see a side-by-side of the Chinese capital on the left and the Japanese capital on the right, a very grid-like setup for both. The Japanese also borrowed the idea of writing, Chinese characters. So, in fact, in the early period of Japanese history, to be able to be literate in Japanese meant that you could actually read and write Chinese. So later on, the Japanese would develop their own unique characters for their language, but early in its history, they basically used Chinese. They also adopted Buddhism, but they retained the traditions of Shinto beliefs. So Buddhism had its origins, as we learned, in India, and eventually made its way to China on the Silk Road, and eventually to Japan. Now, the Japanese had their own traditional religious beliefs called the Shinto. Shinto was a belief system that existed in Japan, did not come from someplace else. So we need to talk about a specific period. It's called the Heian period, 794 to 1185. It was during this time period that the imperial court moved to Heian, which is the modern-day city of Kyoto. So during this Heian period, the nobles followed and created a highly refined culture. So we have to think about how we see sort of contemporary Japan today is different than what Japan may have been just 100 or 150 years ago. But during the Heian period, there were lots of rules and regulations about dress and behavior and sort of etiquette that nobles had to live their lives by. In the Heian period, gentlemen and ladies followed elaborate rituals and artistic pursuits, Women often wore their hair really long, and men and women were generally forbidden to basically see each other. That's why in this picture there's a curtain that's separating the man from the bottom left from the two women on the other side. Also, proper etiquette and appearance was really important. For instance, women wore their hair down to their ankles, long, straight, black hair. They also blackened their teeth with cosmetics. That was a sign of beauty. They also had to dye their clothes to match the seasons. So depending on the seasons, their clothes might be very colorful, depending on the season was. They would have very dark teeth, and they would have very heavy white makeup. This was considered signs of beauty back then. Remember, a woman with light skin was basically a woman who stayed indoors all day and pursued artistic pursuits. She was not out working in the fields. If she was out working in the fields, she would be a peasant. She would not have light skin. She would have tan, dark skin, and that would be a sign of poverty. So light-colored skin became a sign of wealth and status, and that's why it's a sign of beauty. Now, everybody was expected to write poetry and paint. Now, be careful. When I say everyone, I mean everybody within the noble class. So poetry, painting, artistic pursuits, very important during this time period. Also, the nobles looked down on common people who did not participate in court refinement. So court refinement was that refined way of life, the way you dressed, the way you had your appearance, type of activities you engaged in. Commoners didn't do those things. Commoners worked.